Imagine a country where the law dictates who you can marry, where you can live, and what opportunities you can have, all based on the color of your skin. This wasn't a dystopian novel. This was reality in South Africa for nearly 50 years. This is the story of apartheid. The year is 1948. South Africa's National Party comes to power and introduces a system they call apartheid. It's an Afrikaans word meaning separateness, and it became a brutal system of institutionalized racial segregation and discrimination. The goal was to cement white minority rule and systematically disenfranchise the non-white majority. But this wasn't just about separation. It was about oppression, enforced by the full power of the state. To understand apartheid, we have to look at its legal pillars. The foundation was the Population Registration Act of 1950. This law classified every single South African into one of 4 racial categories: white, colored, Indian, or black. Your classification determined your entire life. It was cold, bureaucratic, and devastatingly effective. Families were torn apart if members were classified differently. Then came the Group Areas Act, also in 1950. This law carved up the country, assigning specific residential and business areas for each racial group. For non-white South Africans, this often meant forced removals from their homes and communities. Imagine bulldozers rolling into your neighborhood, a place where your family has lived for generations, and being told you have to leave. Over 3.5 million people were forcibly displaced, their homes demolished to make way for white-only areas. Vibrant, mixed communities like District 6 in Cape Town were completely erased. Another cornerstone was the Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act of 1949, which made it illegal for people of different races to marry. The Immorality Act went even further, criminalizing sexual relations between white and non-white people. These laws didn't just enforce separation. They sought to control the most intimate aspects of human life. Public spaces became a landscape of segregation. There were separate beaches, separate buses, separate hospitals, separate schools, and even separate park benches. The facilities for non-white people were almost always inferior. Education was a particularly cruel tool. The Bantu Education Act of 1953 was explicitly designed to train black South Africans for a life of manual labor and subservience. Hendrik Verwoerd, the architect of apartheid, infamously said there was no place for the black person in the European community above the level of certain forms of labor. The government also created what were called Bantustans, or homelands. These were 10 designated territories for black South Africans, supposedly to grant them self-governance, but in reality, these Bantustans were impoverished, fragmented pieces of land, often with no resources or infrastructure. The government used them to strip black South Africans of their citizenship, declaring them citizens of these so-called independent states. It was a cynical move to make the black majority foreigners in their own country. But where there is oppression, there is always resistance. From the very beginning, South Africans fought back. The African National Congress, or ANC, originally formed in 1912, became the leading force in the anti-apartheid struggle. Initially committed to non-violent protests, the ANC organized boycotts, strikes, and civil disobedience campaigns. The 1950s saw a wave of resistance. The Defiance Campaign of 1952 saw thousands of volunteers deliberately breaking apartheid laws, courting arrests to flood the jails and overwhelm the system. But the state's response was consistently brutal. The turning point came on March 21, 1960, in a township called Sharpeville. A crowd of unarmed protesters gathered outside a police station to demonstrate against the hated pass laws, which required black South Africans to carry identification passbooks at all times. The police opened fire on the peaceful crowd, killing 69 people and injuring hundreds more. Many were shot in the back as they tried to flee. The Sharpeville massacre sent shockwaves across the world and marked the end of non-violent protests for many. The government banned the ANC and other liberation movements. In response, the ANC formed its armed wing, Umkhonto we Sizwe, or Spear of the Nation. One of its key leaders was a young lawyer named Nelson Mandela. Mandela and other leaders went underground, coordinating acts of sabotage against state infrastructure. But in 1962, Mandela was captured. In what became known as the Rivonia trial, he and several other ANC leaders were charged with sabotage and conspiracy to overthrow the government. In his famous speech from the dock, Mandela declared, "I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve, but if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." He and his comrades were sentenced to life in prison, most of them sent to the infamous Robben Island. With its leaders imprisoned, the struggle continued. On June 16, 1976, another defining moment occurred in Soweto. Thousands of high school students marched in protest against a new decree that forced them to learn in Afrikaans, the language of the oppressor. Police once again responded with bullets. The image of 12-year-old Hector Peterson shot and dying, being carried by a fellow student, became a global symbol of the regime's brutality. The Soweto uprising sparked a new wave of resistance that swept across the country. By the 1980s, the fight against apartheid was a global cause. The world could no longer ignore what was happening. International pressure mounted. Countries imposed economic sanctions, crippling South Africa's economy. A powerful cultural boycotts saw artists and athletes refuse to perform or compete in the country. The Free Nelson Mandela campaign became a global rallying cry, with concerts and protests held around the world. Inside South Africa, the townships were in a state of constant unrest. The government declared states of emergency, giving police and military sweeping powers. But the spirit of resistance could not be broken. The cost of maintaining apartheid both economically and socially was becoming unsustainable. By the late 1980s, even some within the ruling National Party realized that change was inevitable. The final chapter began on February 2, 1990. The newly elected president, F.W. de Klerk, stood before Parliament and delivered a speech that stunned the nation and the world. He announced the unbanning of the ANC and other liberation movements, the suspension of executions, and the unconditional release of political prisoners, including Nelson Mandela. 9 days later, on February 11, 1990, Nelson Mandela walked out of Victor Verster prison, a free man after 27 years. He walked hand in hand with his wife Winnie, his fist raised in a symbol of victory. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy, broadcast live across the globe. What followed were 4 years of intense and often difficult negotiations to dismantle the entire apartheid system and chart a course for a new, democratic South Africa. It was a period filled with hope but also fraught with violence as extremist groups from both sides tried to derail the process. But the will for peace and democracy prevailed. On April 27, 1994, South Africa held its first ever multiracial democratic election. For the first time, millions of black South Africans were able to vote. Lines snaked for miles as people, young and old, waited patiently for their turn to cast a ballot and claim their rightful place as citizens. Nelson Mandela was elected as the first president of a free South Africa. The fall of apartheid is a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the unwavering fight for freedom and justice. It reminds us that even the most entrenched systems of oppression can be overcome through courage, perseverance, and solidarity. The story of South Africa is a story of hope, a reminder that a better future is always possible. Thanks for watching. If you found this story powerful, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into history. Let us know in the comments what other historical events you'd like to see covered. See you next time.